So Shalane, thank you so much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership.
Thanks. Thank you, Dr. Nick. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
It's great to have you. And before we walk into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your own background? Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Hawaii, which is a small island exactly on the other side of the world from South Africa. So I have come a long ways to finding myself in South Africa. But I grew up in the San Francisco area of California. And so that's why when I was younger, my dream was to be a marine biologist. And I landed very far from that, but it was because I was always around the ocean and I was really inspired and curious as to what the ocean holds for us.
The ocean, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was your dream career. And can you tell us who inspired you in your early days?
Yeah. So I was really fortunate to have some very good teachers. I was a bit of a teacher's pet when I was in school. I enjoyed school so much. I was pretty nerdy. I was pretty studious. So I had a few favorite teachers. My second grade teacher, Miss Kobayashi, my fifth grade teacher, Mr. Monson, and then in high school had a really great leadership teacher. His name was Mr. Parks. But aside from my teachers, I had a really supportive mom who kind of supported me in whatever it is that I wanted to do. So she kind of instilled in me that as long as I was happy, that was what was most important.
Now, Shalane, you're leading a very impressive career. You've been with some of the big brands in public affairs and obviously public service and NGOs. Looking back over your career, would you say there was a turning point or maybe a couple of turning points?
Yeah. When I was in college, I studied abroad, had the opportunity to spend a semester in Thailand. I studied economics and sociology in college. And in Thailand, they had an economics program, and I enrolled in that program and got credits, which was really helpful. But learning about economics from a less powerful country, a quote unquote developing or third world country, was really powerful because when you grow up in America, you're taught that you're always right and we are the superpower. And so it was a really nice experience to understand how some of these lesser developed countries operate and what their role is in a global economy. And so that really inspired me and kind of showed me how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Right. So there was definitely that studying abroad and spending a semester in a different country. And then obviously moving to South Africa in 2013. That was also a huge pivoting point for me because I went to South Africa for a 1 year position and ended up staying there for 10. So I would say that that was a huge pivot point.
And today you're leading the Trevor Foundation in South Africa. And I see you just initiated a new cohort. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are led by Trevor as a visionary, and he's very passionate about education. But we really want to create a world where education enables young people to achieve the impossible. And we know that not everyone is in the position to have access to great quality education and equitable access to quality education. And so we run various initiatives in order to support that. We run a schools program providing access to holistic education in government schools. And then we have a program called Education Changemakers, which you mentioned, which trains 50 young educators across the Southern African region on leadership, human-centered design thinking, and entrepreneurship. We also fund grants and technical support so that young educators can implement their wildest ideas in improving education outcomes in their classrooms and communities.
And Shalane, what would you say is driving you today?
Yeah, I think as an executive director, I'm in a very privileged position to drive an organization and think innovatively, and to, be involved in social impact and social justice. And the why we do it and the what we do is very clear. But I think what's fun is thinking about how, right? So coming up with different ways to solve challenges that have been around for a very long time, working with people in different ways. Yeah, it's really around the how and the innovation that really gets me excited.
Now, looking into the future, and I know it's a big question, but what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Uh, Leadership is multifaceted. It is it's not easy, I think, but to me it really means to create a space where people feel safe and empowered to step up. I think your role as a leader is to know when to lead from the front, but also when to step back and give others a platform to shine, right? And so in that way, being a leader is definitely not about you, but it's about creating the next generations of leaders after you. So maybe at first you're setting an example, and setting precedent, but then it's about getting out of the way and letting other people step up.
Now, Shalane, since you're building future leaders, especially in education, which is so important, can you tell us from your experience, what does it take to build future leaders, to encourage future leaders?
Yeah, it takes a lot of humility and vulnerability, and self-awareness. And I always think of myself as having to set an example, or being a role model. So role modeling behavior that you would want our future cohort of leaders to be. So oftentimes we get into this place of we're complaining about leadership being corrupt or not transparent or not being honest. And rather than complaining, it's about role modeling that behavior within yourself. So I'm a huge proponent of not just, I actually probably, I exhibit what I believe through behavior as opposed to just saying it over and over. So I'd rather show people what I mean rather than telling them what I mean.
Now, Shalane, these are challenging times as the world is stumbling from one crisis into the next. What is your advice for future leaders in terms of challenges? What are some of the biggest challenges they should expect to encounter in their career?
Yeah. So the world is changing very quickly. The world is evolving. I know there's a lot of talk about technology and new technology coming into our lives. And I think new leaders need to be humble. They need to be able to problem solve. They need to be able to adjust. And part of innovation is constantly understanding what's happening and then being able to apply those learnings moving forward, right? And so in our efforts just to understand what's going on, we have to be humble and admit to ourselves that we don't always know what's going on. Like we don't know the answer, but we're willing to learn and figure out what the problem is so that we can try and fix it going forward. And I think all of that takes a lot of self-awareness. Like we need to know exactly who we are, and we need to understand our morals and our ethics and our personal biases and how that impacts and affects everyone around us. So I think leaders in the future need to constantly do work on themselves, in order to have a positive effect on others.
And can you tell us in the work that you do with future leaders, especially in education, what are maybe one of or two new skills that you are teaching them?
Yeah. So for new skills, one of the things I always talk about with my team is that leadership isn't reserved for senior managers or senior leaders, but I think everyone can have leadership goals. And so it's putting leadership in the forefront, and it's challenging ourselves to step up as leaders in different ways. So for some people, that might be doing a presentation internally for the first time and then taking it to the next step and doing a presentation externally. It might be about having a hard conversation with a colleague and being vulnerable and asking for feedback. So I think that's number one, is ensuring that everyone sets leadership goals for themselves. Everyone down from an intern to a senior manager can get involved in that. And then I think secondly is about building this culture of mentorship. So mentorship versus competition. I think once we break down those barriers and know that we're not competing with each other, but there's a lot of power in collectively working together, collectively bringing together ideas, is when you will see a company collectively growing, an ecosystem collectively growing, and then hopefully the country.
And Shalane, since you mentioned mentorship, and obviously as a mentor yourself to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two when you mentored an upcoming leader and that person took your advice to heart?
Yeah. One of the things I enjoy doing, again, and thinking about creating space for others, is I've had the pleasure of hiring really young staff. So we always bring on interns. So I started out as an independent consultant in 2018, and I now have a staff of 13 in South Africa. Many of them started with me for their first time, in terms of that was their first job. So my first intern, her name was Emma. She worked with me when the Trevor Noah Foundation launched, and now she's working in the States for a policy organization. Very similar. I have another staff who worked for me as a programs assistant, and her name is Elikiana, and now she's our junior data analyst. And so I've really seen her grow over the last few years in confidence, in being able to, speak for what she's interested in, and then giving her the space to explore those interests. But running my own organization gives me the chance to do that for people, and I'm more than happy to create that space and see people grow. It's a lot of fun.
Right. And looking back over your own leadership journey, who are the role models of leadership that you have encountered and would recommend future leaders should learn from?
Yeah. So it would be amiss if I didn't mention Trevor, obviously, but I've had the pleasure of working with him now for about 5 years, and he has incredible work ethic. He's probably one of the most hardest working people that I know. He's also very grounded, and he is very down to earth. And so, yeah, I think over his life, as his lifestyle has changed, as he's kind of skyrocketed in terms of career, he's still like such a very cool person to be around. And I don't think any of that fame has gotten to his head. So I really appreciate that about him. And then secondly, Sazini Mojapelo is now the head of the GBV Response Fund, I believe. But she was one of the first people that I met who I identified as a cross-sector leader. So in my career history, I've been very intentional about getting experience in the corporate sector. I was a consultant at the Ministry of Home Affairs in Namibia for about 18 months to get experience in government. And then obviously, most of my experience sits in social impact from the nonprofit sector. And she has this great trajectory of moving through those sectors as well. And I really think that leaders who can succeed and lead organizations across sectors have a great ability of creating partnerships, creating sustainable solutions, and are really good at problem solving. And so when I first met her, I was a consultant at the time, trying to start my own business. And she very happily became one of my board members. She was an advisor. And the way that she just opened up her expertise to me, her network to me, was very helpful. And I'm so grateful and thankful for that experience. But she was one of my first mentors, if I could say, in South Africa.
Thank you for sharing. And please tell us, where can our listeners follow you?
Sure. So on the Trevor Noah Foundation website, www.trevornoahfoundation.org. We have a blog. I often write pieces on there. My LinkedIn, so my first and last name, you can find me on LinkedIn. But those are probably the places that I reflect the most.
And last but not least, Shalane, talking about leadership legacy, can you maybe share what is it you would like to be remembered for?
Ooh. I think I want to be remembered for creating my own tables and my own spaces. I think I've been fortunate enough to be included at decision-making tables from a very young age, and I'm very fortunate for that. But very often I'm in a room and I'm still surrounded by older men. And so the only way to change that, I can always bring people with me to join me at the table, but the only way in which we are going to completely change the face of leadership is by creating our own tables. So hopefully we can do that through the Trevor Noah Foundation.
I like that. I really like that. Shalane, thank you so much for making time to share your insights and your wisdom and for building so many future leaders.
Thanks. Thanks, Dr. Nick.